Bonsoir French students, bienvenue au vidéo 7 du chapitre 5. So we're now on video 7 of chapter 5. And this topic is just a quick topic that leads us into one other topic. So we're going to talk about two different things in this video. And this first one here is just an extension of the weather topic that you learned about in video 6, le temps. So you learned about different expressions for weather. We can go back and quickly review some of those. Okay, and we'll bypass a couple of slides we looked at there earlier. So you learned all about le temps, and we can ask about le temps by asking quel temps fait-il aujourd'hui? So what is the weather like today? So you learned all kinds of expressions like il fait froid, il fait chaud, il fait mauvais, il fait beau. Going on to this slide, we see that there are other expressions we can use for weather like il fait du vent, il y a du vent, il pleut, il neige. Okay, so il pleut, il neige are two that we're definitely going to be taking a look at as we go back to where we started our video today. So there are some other expressions we should look at for describing weather. Les expressions pour décrire le temps. So the verb faire, as we saw in previous videos, is a very common verb used to describe the weather. It's also a verb that you're going to be seeing a lot more of with different kind of idiomatic expressions. So you describe many different activities by using the verb faire in French, just like we would use make or do in English. Okay, so the expressions we're looking at here are basically what we're talking about is looking at what happened today, what happens tomorrow, and what happened yesterday. And we're looking at the expressions il fait beau, il fait du vent, il pleut, il neige. Okay, so these are things that are happening today in the present time. Quel temps fait-il? And if we want to even take these questions and kind of invert them a little bit so you can see their structure. So, quel temps fait-il? Sometimes when we see this inverted form, it feels a little bit different from what we're used to. So you could easily rewrite this to say, quel temps il fait? Which would be like asking what time or what weather it is. But if we're asking a question, we can also invert that word order to say something like what weather makes it. Okay, so in the present tense, you can say il fait beau. Oh, right now, today, at this time, the weather's beautiful. Il fait du vent. Oh, it's windy. Du in that case is like some, so there's some wind out there. And if you want to say it's raining or it's snowing, it would be il pleut and il neige, respectively. Okay, if you want to talk about tomorrow, so we're moving into the future now. Okay, the question you see there is quel temps va-t-il faire? So we could kind of change the structure of this and say quel temps il va faire. And they both mean the same thing. In the case of the inversion, if you say quel temps va-t-il, if you put il after va, like this, it doesn't work unless you add a T to the middle for pronunciation. It would be like saying quel temps va-il faire? So because there are two vowels back to back like that, we're going to add that T in the middle. So a little bit of review of inverted questions if you don't remember or haven't studied that before. So, quel temps va-t-il faire? What's it going to be like tomorrow? And we use this form of aller, which is il va. Il va faire beau, which means it's going to be nice. Or il va faire du vent, it's going to be windy. Il va pleuvoir, or il va neiger. Oh, it's going to rain or it's going to snow. So we can use this going to, which we would call, and I'll put that term down here right next to this sentence, le futur immédiat. And that just means the immediate future, and it's that going to form that we would use in English. The same thing in French. Okay, and finally, if you're talking about yesterday, quel temps a-t-il fait? So again, I can change my word order to make that sentence structure look a little clearer. Quel temps il a fait? And you can see when you change things around like this that we now have a form of the passé composé with the verb avoir. So avoir gets conjugated to go along with il, so il a fait. So what was the weather like yesterday? Il a fait beau, il a fait du vent, so it was nice, it was windy. And even for these expressions like il pleut, il neige, we can put these in passé composé also. Il a plu, il a neigé, so it rained, it snowed. And so we can talk about different times, different time periods, the present, the future, or the past when we're talking about weather. So it's helpful to know these different expressions that you can use. And on your exam, you'll hear it probably, I think it's in the listening section, you'll need to recognize these passé composé forms, il a plu or il a neigé. All right, the other topic we're going to take a look at today is les expressions avec faire. So again, we know that faire means to make or to do, but we can use the verb faire to talk about lots of different activities. Some of those would be le sport et les distractions. So sports and distraction here, it's kind of like a false cognate. It's easy to recognize this word because we know what distractions are in English, but in English, usually distraction is kind of it's more of a negative sense, like something that's taking you away from what you should be doing. But distraction in French means like leisure activities or hobbies, and you see some of those here. So we see faire de l'exercice, faire du bateau, which would be going boating, faire du camping, faire du jogging, faire du shopping, and faire du ski. All of those are borrowed from English, right? These are all words that we recognize very easily. You can also say faire du ski nautique. So if you're going water skiing, you need to add that extra word there. Faire du sport. So there's all kinds of sports we can talk about using the verb faire. So faire du tennis, faire du hockey, faire du foot. That would be soccer. Faire du basket, playing basketball. So lots of sports use this expression as well. Faire du vélo, that's to go bike riding. Du VTT would be like, I always forget what this is called in English, but it's that kind of like rough terrain bike riding. Faire une promenade, to go for a walk. Faire une randonnée is to go hiking. And finally, faire un voyage, to take a trip. Okay, so I have included a question here for you that you could answer if you would like to do that. Quelle activité est-ce que tu préfères? And I've used the verb préférer here to ask you about your preference. So you could say, moi je préfère faire, and it sounds like you're saying the same word twice with préfère faire. So you could choose any one of these activities that stands out to you. You could also say, moi j'aime faire, so I like to do, I prefer to do. Either one would work here. So for myself, I could say, moi je préfère faire de l'exercice. I really like running. Or I could say, moi je préfère faire du jogging. So I could specify it and say what type of exercise I like to do. I could also say, moi j'aime faire du shopping. But these days, I probably more like faire du shopping en ligne. What do I mean by en ligne? Online. So we might be doing more of that these days. Okay, so I'll ask you to answer the same question, and you can choose either préfère or aimer in this case. You can choose whichever response you prefer. But in your case, quelle activité est-ce que tu préfères? All right, and we'll look at one other set of expressions avec faire, les expressions avec faire, le ménage et les courses. And le ménage is like housework. Les courses will mean either errands or groceries, depending on which form of this expression you use. And so, in contrast to the other activities with faire, now we're talking about things that we kind of have to do, that we might not really want to do. So, faire des courses or les courses, there's a slight difference there. If we say faire des courses, des kind of means like some, and then it's to run errands. Faire les courses, which is a bit more specific, that is to buy groceries. So that's kind of like one errand out of many errands that a person might do. Faire du jardinage, to garden. Faire la cuisine, la lessive, la vaisselle, le ménage. These are all different kinds of housework. So la cuisine, of course, is to cook. La lessive is to do the laundry. Vaisselle, the dishes. And ménage, as I said at the beginning, is to do housework. Now, something important to know if you're speaking in the affirmative versus the negative when you're talking about these different activities. Any of the articles that are like the indefinite articles, or the partitive, like you're talking about some of that thing, when you make it negative, you change those articles to de or des apostrophes when the verb is negated. So here's an example of that. Let's say that you said, je fais du jogging en hiver. So I can do this, just to make it clear what we're trying to do here. Okay, je fais du jogging en hiver. So I go jogging in winter. Now, if I want to make it negative, I'm going to add my ne and my pas. We'll bold it just to make it stand out there. When we say faire du something, then you're going to change this to de when you use a negative form. So since we say faire du jogging, faire du jardinage, faire des courses, any of those faire expressions that use un, une, des, du, de la, or de le, you're going to change those to de or de apostrophe when you make it negative. So, je ne fais pas de jogging en hiver. Or I could say something like, je ne fais pas de jardinage. And I just had that off to the right? Je ne fais pas de jardinage en hiver. So I don't garden in the winter. It's not good weather for that, right? So any expression where you're using that un, une, or du, des, or de apostrophe, you're going to change it to just de when you make the negative form. Okay, but if you have a sentence where you're making it negative and la or le is the form that's being used with faire, or the article that's being used with faire, then you do not need to do that. So, nous ne faisons pas la cuisine le matin. So again, if I were to take out my negation here, say, nous faisons la cuisine le matin. So we cook in the morning. And if I want to make it negative, then I'm just going to add my ne pas back in. Okay, so nous ne faisons pas la cuisine le matin. So it really just depends what comes between faire and the activity you're doing. If it's le or la, or les or el apostrophe, you don't need to change the form at all. But if you're using a form with un, une, des, du, de la, de le, then you do need to change it. So an example that I put here is, moi, je ne fais pas la lessive le matin. So you can go ahead and jump in here and you can either write or type a sentence that is either in, well, I think the best way to do it would be to put it in the negative form so that you can practice that. So say something that you do not do, an expression with faire, and you can follow the examples that I have here at the bottom of the slide. Okay, so that gives you some good expressions to be able to use to talk about activities that you'd like to do for fun, such as the ones we see right here, le sport et les distractions. And now you also have some new vocabulary to be able to talk about some things you have to do but don't necessarily always like to do. So these will be useful in being able to talk about your present and past activities. Okay, so that's it for video 7, and I'll see you all for video 8. Au revoir!